Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Kuda. I am one of the nurse practitioners here at Vitality. And today I wanted to come to you to talk a little bit about thyroid health. It is such a prevalent condition, and it's so important because it can affect us in so many different ways. So it's interesting because about 12% of the population will actually have a thyroid condition. 60% are undiagnosed, so they don't even know they have this thyroid condition. Women are actually 5 to 8 times more likely to develop this thyroid condition than men. And another interesting thing is levothyroxine, which is a thyroid medication, is the top selling medication here in the US. And about 15% of the US population over the age of 55 are actually on this medication. Now, it's also important to note that TSH, which is a marker that we use to monitor thyroid levels, can actually be normal and you can still have a sick thyroid. So that is very important. That's why what we do here at Vitality is a much more in-depth look at thyroid health. So what is a thyroid? Well, it's an endocrine gland. It's part of our hormone system. And in this hormone system, our bodies are sending these chemical signals to be released into the bloodstream, and then they bind to these receptor sites. And at that point, they deliver those chemical signals, and there's this physiological process that occurs. And so it's kind of like a vending machine. You go to the vending machine, let's say you're thirsty. And so you put in your quarter or $5 nowadays, and it'll spit out the water. You drink the water, you're not as thirsty anymore. But, you go without it, you become more thirsty. So it's kind of this cycle of sending these signals and delivering what the body needs. And so the thyroid is especially important because nearly every cell of our body has a thyroid receptor site. It is located in the neck, just anterior to your trachea, right below the Adam's apple. And it is heavily vascularized. So it can be impacted by so many different changes that occur in our body. It is considered a master gland. So it secretes, again, those hormones responsible for growth and metabolism and development. And again, influences nearly every physiological process in the human body. So what does the thyroid do beyond that? Well, again, because there is, nearly every cell in our body has a receptor site, it is in charge of energy, growth, mood, memory. So, people with low thyroid will often have foggy thinking or brain fog. It can impact body temperature, weight, bone metabolism, muscle strength, gastrointestinal motility, menstrual cycles, fat and carbohydrate metabolism, cholesterol, and things like breathing and heart rate. So it's a pretty important piece of the puzzle here. So how does the thyroid work? Well, it's not just a thyroid thing, it's actually a brain thing too. So the thyroid communicates with 2 other glands in the brain, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. We call this HPT for short. But basically, this is a highly effective network of communication where it's constantly trying to work together to create this even balance and this inner peace, if you will. So I think of it like this. The hypothalamus is the control center, and that is the person who regulates the thermostat, right? And so the pituitary gland then is the thermostat. And so that's going to secrete what we call TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. And if you're familiar with, thyroid, many of you will know the TSH because that's the marker that the general practitioners will often draw. And so then the thyroid gland is actually the furnace. And so that's going to kick out the heat, the thyroid hormones T3 and T4. So it kind of works on this negative feedback loop all the time. So the hypothalamus in the brain, again, as the control center, if it gets too cold, it's going to kick on and set that thermostat to a higher temperature. And again, these are all just analogies in terms of how the thyroid function works with these other parts of our brain. And so the interesting thing about thyroid hormone is T4 has to be converted into T3 for it to be able to do all of these wonderful things in our body. And I think of T3 as the gas, whereas if you measure the brakes, that's called reverse T3. So long story short, it's this constant negative feedback loop where we're trying to create this balance. And if we don't have balance, then all of these symptoms can manifest. So what are the causes of thyroid disease? You can have trauma, such as traumatic brain injury, because again, that thyroid is very vascular. You can have surgeries, can be, again, very traumatic. Certain toxins, infections, even genetics definitely play a role in this as well. Again, environmental triggers, nutrient deficiencies, because we know the thyroid needs specific nutrients, leaky gut, food sensitivities. So if we have some sort of sensitivity to food or celiac, that can also trigger any type of thyroid disorder. Estrogen dominance, because estrogen too much can actually interfere with that conversion of T4 to T3. And stress is so important here and something that we often don't give enough credit to. It has a lot of involvement in thyroid destruction, unfortunately. And so how this works is the adrenal glands, which are just little glands that sit on top of our kidneys, that those make cortisol. And too much cortisol can actually, again, interfere with that conversion of T4 to T3. It can actually also increase the reverse T3. So again, it's slowing down the gas and it's putting on the brakes. So a high cortisol, AKA high stress, can cause low thyroid function. And so, that's the body's job, right? It's always working to defend. How can I create this balance? And so the adrenal glands will pick up the slack to drag yourself out of bed when the thyroid is just not functioning at all or not optimally. So what are these symptoms? Do I have thyroid disease? Well, symptoms can often overlap with other conditions, especially other hormone imbalances. And most of the time, it's usually hypothyroidism or low thyroid, 98 to 99% of the time. But things are slowed, right? So you can have constipation, you can have dry skin and hair and nails. You can have hair loss, scalp hair loss, more diffuse, where it's just all over hair loss. Again, foggy thinking, slow thought process, weight gain, painful, heavy periods. You can experience more sadness, hoarseness, infertility. A lot of women who have been trying to get pregnant, there's a certain level where that TSH really needs to be. So infertility is one of the symptoms of low thyroid. You can also have puffiness of the face or eyelids, kind of the outer portion of your eyebrow can be thinning, high blood cholesterol. So, and that's just to name a few. So lots of different symptoms, lots of different presentations. So how do we test for thyroid? Well, one specific test that you're probably familiar with is TSH, and that stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. And again, that is coming from the pituitary gland. So it's a standard test, oldest test we know about. Unfortunately, there's so many ranges it's such a wide range when you go to these different labs. It could be anywhere from 0.3 to 5, which is very broad. And so our goal is to really interpret these labs in an optimal range, because we know that ideally levels less than 2, your thyroid is functioning optimally and you're going to feel your best. We also measure those hormones that the thyroid produces, T3 and T4. Oftentimes the T3 is not measured, but again, if we don't know what that gas is or how our thyroid is functioning from an active and free hormone standpoint, then we really can't help the body and the thyroid and support it in the ways that we know how. Again, T4 has to be converted to T3. So some people have problems converting T4 to T3. And in those people, if we're not checking a free T3, we don't know. We don't know what's happening. And we think, oh, everything is fine, when actually it's not. We also check thyroid antibodies. TPO is one, and this is actually usually the first to show a problem. This can be identified in any type of autoimmune thyroid condition, which is quite a large amount of thyroid cases. Sometimes we test a reverse T3, which again is the brakes, but we know that we're going to be working on stress reduction strategies anyway, so sometimes that's not always necessary. Other tests to consider are hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin. So basically, we're looking at your risk factor for diabetes. What's your metabolic health? What is your fasting glucose? Sometimes cortisol levels are important to monitor, especially with those patients who are in a high stressful state all of the time. We can also measure things like DHEA and ferritin. So it's not just thyroid that makes up thyroid health. So that's important to note as well. Even things like iodine and selenium, really trying to uncover the trigger for what is causing this thyroid dysfunction. Is it a brain thing? Is it a signaling problem? Is it the thyroid's fault? Is it the immune system's fault? And if it's the immune system's fault, then where was that breakdown? Where did that occur? Could it be from heavy metals? Could it be from excessive estrogen, or more of an estrogen dominant picture? Are there particular nutrient deficiencies that we're lacking, specifically selenium, which is a main antioxidant for thyroid? Gut infections is a big one as well. So many different things that can cause it that we're really looking to identify. The TSH again comes from the brain. So if the brain is not happy with the amount of thyroid, then it's going to ask your thyroid to produce more. So if the thyroid isn't capable of this, or if the brain isn't capable of signaling, well, then we're in a real pickle. So to talk a little bit about how we treat this, again, it's really trying to uncover the underlying root cause. Thyroid medications, there's a time and a place for those. All thyroid medications are bioidentical. So it's really more about that individualized approach and what is best for you. Also identifying fillers and binders, because that kind of is what sets some of these thyroid medications apart. But again, it's all about using the right medications for the right patterns for the right patients. So it's very individualized. We have T4 medications, or it's just T4. And then we have medications that combine T and T3 for those patients who have a harder time converting to T3. Some common challenges when we're talking about thyroid, or when you tend to, have more of an imbalance in your lifetime, would be pregnancy, postpartum, anytime you're on oral contraceptives. Even, several medications can interfere. Puberty, menopause, biotin can actually impact TSH. So not that biotin is bad by any means, but we need to consider that when we're testing our thyroid, because it can interfere with some labs. So in that case, I just like to tell everybody, any biotin that you're on, just go off for 5 days before testing. Obviously, severe illness, chronic stress, use of steroids, that can all impact thyroid as well. So in conclusion, you really don't want to hang your hat on one lab. We are focused more on, the whole picture. We're more complex than one number. So we really want to consider symptoms. And when we're interpreting these labs, we want to focus on optimal ranges, not just this wide, broad range where we're saying, oh, yes, you're normal because you fit into this broad range. So a basic panel is not a complete view of thyroid physiology. So what can you do today? Well, the first thing is you can ask your family physician to order a full thyroid panel with some of the markers that we have discussed. You also want to consider food sensitivity testing or an elimination diet. We know that gluten, dairy, and sugar, soy can often be common triggers. So really minimizing sugar intake, looking at more of an autoimmune paleo diet has actually been associated with lower thyroid antibodies. We want to avoid extreme dieting, yo-yo dieting, and caloric restriction. That is going to put more stress on our bodies and more stress on our adrenal glands, more cortisol output slows the thyroid. So we don't want to do that. Sleep is a big one. We want to make sure that we're getting at least 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night. That is so important. When we go to bed at night, especially around 10 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., that is a crucial period between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. I think of it as we're taking our bodies through this car wash, and it's washing away all of the cellular debris and helping our cells rejuvenate and refresh, and we come out shiny and clean. When we go nights and nights and nights without proper sleep hygiene, then we're going to feel sluggish, and that sludge is going to start to build up, and we're going to notice that. We're going to have symptoms. So sleep is huge. Movement is another big one, making sure that you are moving your body daily. Interval training is great, but you know what? If you just do a brisk walk or jog around the neighborhood, maybe some resistance training, use your own body weight. Just some sort of movement is really key. We want you to drink plenty of water. That helps with detoxification and fueling our kidneys, which are part of that elimination, detoxification. Good, clean, filtered water. Minimizing daily stressors. We talked about stress. We know what it does. And so breathing, meditation, mindfulness, those are all very important to incorporate every single day. And a couple other things are, we want to tackle any nutrient deficiencies. So optimizing vitamin D level, making sure you have a good quality multivitamin that incorporates selenium and zinc and some of those other factors that are really key for thyroid health. And then being aware of your environment and the different toxins that exist. I like to use an app called Environmental Working Group. And this allows us to scan for toxicity in personal care products and foods and cleaning products. And so it's really important to be aware of the toxicity of, what we're exposed to day in and day out. So those are just a few things that you can do to get started on optimizing thyroid health and just being kind to your thyroid. And I hope you enjoyed this session. Thyroid is there's so much more that we could discuss. And so hopefully we will have another session on this as well. Please do not hesitate to send your questions in. And then it was great to be with you today. Thanks.